Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, I'd like to discuss one more time the situation in Ukraine, or rather the diplomatic moves and visions of how this war is going to end. And today, I'd like to focus on three what I call diverging visions. One is that of Secretary of State Rubio, echoing the views of President Trump. The other, President Putin. And the third one is quite interesting and much less known to Western audiences, and that is the views of the Russian generals and also of some of the key opinion makers in talk shows and TV programs that are discussing daily the war in Ukraine. So this is today's vision, the parting of the ways or the divergent views of the three. I start with Secretary of State Rubio. As we all know, he gave an extensive interview to Megyn Kelly a couple of days ago, where he laid out pretty much major ideas echoing what President Trump said some time ago. But there's more to it. And here are some of the key takeaways on the Russian-Ukraine war. Basically, he used the same term as was used by the Democrats and the Biden, which is a Russian aggression. So that's very important. He still sees it as a Russian aggression. He also said that Putin committed atrocities, which is a kind of serious accusation. If you are on the way of peace, that's not the one you would like to throw at somebody without substantive proof. Then he also said that the war is a stalemate and that Russians were suffering heavy casualties, very heavy casualties, millions. Trump said 1 million or something. This is what Rubio said. And that Russian economy is collapsing or is in ruin, or as Trump put it, Putin is ruining Russian economy. So these are the major theses. Now, the only interesting and good thing that he said, that the multipolar world is beginning and that the age of American dictating to the rest of the world is over. So that sort of encourages some positive thinking as to maybe some things have changed in Washington, D.C. and their outlook on the world. But in any case, let's just go by one in critique of Rubio's position. First of all, the most difficult thing to explain here is that Rubio presents this as a Russian-Ukraine conflict, as if the United States was a totally outside observer. It's just a good peacemaker. And the two guys are fighting and they're going to come and force both of them to make peace. This is, of course, a totally wrong picture. Not only is it not a Russia-Ukraine war, it's a Russia-NATO war. And moreover, in NATO, more than 200 billion was spent by the United States. It is the United States missiles that are shooting into Russia. It's U.S. Abrams tanks that are fighting the Russians. So the United States is, whether they like it or not, is a direct participant in this war. And indeed, Trump could have ended this war if he just literally cut off the supply of weaponry and money. By the way, a very interesting case, just apropos the freedom of the press. As soon as a few days ago, the non-military aid was cut, all the 90% of Ukrainian mass media shut down, or they're bleeding for help from the listeners, from the citizens, from other European institutions, because all of Ukraine press is totally financed by the United States. And the saying goes, the one who pays is the one who is ordering the music. Okay, but be it as it may, so this is one thing about Rubio. It is not a Russian-Ukraine war, and unless and until he recognizes this and begins to treat it as an American war, involvement war, nothing is going to come out of it. Second of all, everybody knows it's not a stalemate. It's ridiculous to call it a stalemate. It is a Russian victory unfolding, and that is the reality. Will change any future negotiations. Secondly, there are no Russian atrocities. I haven't seen any. The only thing that they put Putin is that he evacuated Russian children from Kherson, and they call them Ukrainian children, and therefore the International Court of Justice qualifies this as a war crime. Now, YouTube doesn't allow all kinds of things to be said about the horrible things that happened in the war. But those of you who are interested about the horrible things being done, you can check it out on the website of the United Nations Russian delegation that recently presented a report on the war crimes of the Ukrainians committed in Kursk. But that's a separate issue. Now, of course, Russian economy is nowhere on the verge of collapse. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's laughable. Russian economy has grown 4% in 2024, and it is doing quite well despite the sanctions. And it is doing an incredible job under Putin's leadership in the consolidation and unfolding of economic cooperation in the BRICS format. So that is pretty much where Rubio's position is wrong, and it is not going to be easy to bridge over the differences, especially when he said that both sides will have to make compromises. I wonder, compromises over what? Over, let's see. Now, Putin gave an interview a couple of days ago to his um, uh, favorite correspondent, Mr. Zarudny, in the car. And you'll see a picture here. And in addition to what he said regularly, that the Russian conditions is 4 provinces of Donbass plus no membership in NATO, he added a couple of more important things that make it quite complicated. First of all, he said that there's going to be no talking to Zelensky because Zelensky's term expired in May 2024, and that means that it's useless to talk to him because his signature is worth nothing, and any future president of Ukraine could easily refused to honor anything signed by Zelensky. So, according to Ukrainian constitution, the person who has the right to sign, as Putin explained, is the Speaker of the House. But in order for him to be legitimate negotiator, he has to actually dismiss the current president as illegitimate and start acting as acting president until new elections. Now, that is certainly not going to happen. Moreover, another difficulty is that the parliament, the Rada, is term expired too, and they are really ruling through the emergency declaration, state of emergency. So his responsibilities are not legitimate either. Now, Putin brought another one, complication issue, which is Zelensky in 2022 issued a decree banning any negotiation with President Putin, as long as Putin is in power. Well, Putin is elected for next few years, and therefore any negotiations would have to be with Putin. And therefore, if Ukrainians ban themselves to negotiate, well, then there cannot be any negotiations. Now, I would add to this list, to what Mr. Putin said, there's one other one, a complication and a serious one. Membership in NATO is written into the Ukrainian constitution. In other words, Ukraine is striving to join NATO. That is in the constitution. Now, that is one of the major reasons of the war. And therefore, if this war is to end, Ukraine has to accept its neutrality status, and it has to be recognized by all the other members of NATO. Now, that means that this article in the Constitution has to be repealed. But for that, you have to have a legitimate parliament, and there's got to be a majority in that parliament that is willing to do that. Now, none of these are in the foreseeable future. None of these are possible the way things are going in Ukraine. So, in order to have new elections, as I discussed in in several previous videos, you have to have freedom of speech. You have to legalize parties that are now banned. Then you have to somehow organize elections of Ukrainian citizens who are in foreign countries. Then what to do with the provinces that the Russians consider Russian and the Ukrainians consider Ukrainians, and what to do with citizens of these provinces who have fled to western parts of Ukraine, will they be given a chance to vote? So there are many practical issues in terms of elections or making these issues of legitimacy overcome. Okay, now one more thing that I want to add before I move to the generals is that if by some chance there were elections and if the Ukrainian side accepted negotiations, then even in that case, even if there was an agreement, the serious concern that the Russians have is the legitimacy of the borders. In other words, the new Russian borders would have to be recognized not just by Ukraine and not just by the United States, but by the European Union as well, especially with the neighboring countries such as Poland and Romania, obviously Hungary and Slovakia, but also France, Germany, and other countries of the European Union. That is highly unlikely. And unless this happens, then what incentive for Russia to cease fire or to sign any negotiations, to sign any deal? The deal can only be valid for Russians if there is a definite internationally recognized end to the war, abolition of sanctions, and the new Russian borders as internationally recognized. Unless this doesn't happen, this is simply a frozen conflict, and the Russians don't want a frozen conflict. They want the end to the war on their terms. And so now I move on to the third part of this discussion, and that is the public opinion in Russia and the generals. Now, obviously, various generals have different views, and I cannot generalize for all of them. However, there are there's public opinion polls, and there are also discussions on talk shows, and there are prestigious generals and commentators with high ranks who participate regularly in these discussions and voice their views. There's also a very famous Solovyov show, who is considered as a Russian propagandist, but at least he actually does verbalize views of what you can call nationalists or patriots in Russia, and he's usually more, outspoken than what Putin himself says. But I think these views are important because at this point, in my judgment, they do reflect a considerable portion of views in Russia. So what are these views? Well, they obviously diverge from what officially is the position of President Putin. First thing that they say is that they do not trust the West, and they certainly do not trust Zelensky, and they certainly wouldn't trust any president instead elected by the current regime in Kiev. They don't trust them because they said, look, we tried Minsk 1 accords, we tried Minsk 2, and we were all deceived. And then in Istanbul, we tried to give them everything. They could have had the borders, including Donbass, and they walked away and decided to fight. Now, if they decide to fight, they have to accept the consequences of fighting. And the consequences of fighting is that Russia won, and they have to accept our victory. Second thing is that they obviously don't want any limit to the 4 provinces, as President Putin put it. The minimum that these people agree to, where the war could stop potentially, is all of Novorossiya, including Odessa and Kharkov. And even with those conditions, the rest of Ukraine cannot be allowed to simply walk into NATO or to the European Union, which is the same thing. And that means that the war would be pretty much not won, if not to say lost, if the rest of Ukraine, which is 2/3 of it, would still go to NATO, would still have Western troops as peacekeepers or in some other form. So they basically say that the kind of conditions that even Putin is proposing are not good enough. And this is very interesting because this is a public discussion in a Russian open media that actually is in disagreement with the official position of President Putin. Official position of President Putin is too soft. It's not good enough. Now, when you ask them, what do they really want? Where should Russia go and stop? They say, well, obviously, it's all of Ukraine. Only then we could be safe that this Ukraine will not be turned against Russia again and used by NATO as a launching pad of its war that they're preparing on Russia. So it's going to be very difficult to see how these people will be persuaded that it's worth it to conclude peace. My own opinion is that the only way that Putin's formula can prevail is if this indeed an internationally recognized treaty. And for that, European Union has to be on board, and Ukraine has to be on board, and they recognize the 4 provinces are Russian territory by international law, and there is no membership in NATO or any other military alliance, no foreign troops, restoration of Russian language and Russian religion on the territory of Ukraine, and so on and so forth, including the rights of those citizens who are Russian speakers to practice their language. Now, all of that could potentially sway these people to accept less than total capitulation of Ukraine. But at this moment, if I compare the 3 positions, what is abundantly clear is that the first hopes when Trump came to power, that there will be speedy peace, they're fading very fast. Because what is actually happening is that Trump administration is not in any hurry to force Zelensky to start negotiating peace. And even if he did, now we know that on the Russian side, this is not good enough. And there are obstacles that have to be overcome. And even if they are overcome, still a lot of Russian public opinion and the generals think that the only true solution is total Russian victory, including collapse or removal of Zelensky's regime, and then a new regime and new elections and a new status for Ukraine, maybe as a part of the Russian Federation, maybe in some autonomous status. So that's where we are. Thank you very much. And don't forget to subscribe and read my books. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.